The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We have received news in the last 24 hours about the death of another Ebola patient here in the United States. This is Dr. Martin Salia, infected with Ebola in his native Sierra Leone, treated at a Nebraska hospital, Nebraska Medical Center, and died yesterday. His doctors said at a news conference that Salia was very, very sick already when he was flown to the United States, and his case illustrated what doctors have been saying for a long time, which is that early treatment matters. And as you remember, the doctor here in the U.S. who started showing symptoms after his return from West Africa went to Bellevue Hospital here in New York City right away upon feeling sluggish and developing a fever. And he was fortunately able to receive treatment that allowed the virus to leave his system. And what's most interesting to me about the coverage around Dr. Martin Salia's death is actually the fact that it's so different than what we were seeing before the election. And a viewer and member, Ryan Conway, sent us this great graphic which illustrates that the coverage of Ebola before the election of 2 weeks ago was completely different than after the election. Before the election, the coverage was a couple of people have Ebola in the U.S., run for your lives, quarantine everyone, Obama doesn't know what he's doing, and we're all going to die. And all of a sudden, within 24 to 48 hours of that midterm election, prior to it, the coverage really damped down quite a bit. And since, we have seen none of the fear-mongering coverage. And even now that we had a person with Ebola in the U.S., many people didn't even know this man was here, Lewis, because the media coverage has not only been not fear-mongering, but it's been just very infrequent with regard to Ebola.
Right. And with the fear-mongering earlier, every time there was a new case with the couple of doctors that contracted it from patients they were treating, it was as if 1,000 people had contracted the virus. And it's really just paranoia and panic. And when the media backs off just a little bit, this is what happens.
And look at the tone of the coverage that we saw during the treatment of and subsequent death of Dr. Martin Salia, which it's just as tragic as every other Ebola death. It was in the U.S., but the coverage was, hey, there's an isolated patient in Nebraska. Medical professionals have this under control. We're not all going to die. Everything is calm. And it makes me wonder, was the Ebola fear-mongering panic prior to the election, was it caused or in any way pushed ahead by a Republican desire to paint Obama as guilty of something with regard to Ebola, and the need for that has now disappeared? Was it a corporate media that had a desire to do it then, and now the desire to fearmonger has gone away? What do you think caused this?
I think that was the news. I think that the media wanted the hits, the ratings, the views, and that was the way to get it. I think the election just stole the spotlight from Ebola, and I think it's that simple, really. Now, what are we going to focus on? Whatever the next thing is, maybe Ebola will come back.
News out of the Middle East. 4 people were killed in a terrorist attack at a synagogue in a Jerusalem neighborhood this morning. Police said that 2 attackers from East Jerusalem entered the synagogue in the Har Nof neighborhood at 7 a.m. and began attacking worshipers who were there for morning prayers with a gun, a meat cleaver, and an axe. It is being called an absolutely brutal terrorist attack. Both terrorists, within 7 minutes, had been killed by Israeli police. Israeli police said there were 6 injured, including 2 policemen, one of whom was seriously injured, the other moderately hurt. The attack occurred, as I said, at a synagogue, the Keilat Yaakov synagogue, located in a religious institution which includes a study hall. One of the worshipers said that the 2 terrorists shouted Allahu Akbar during the attack, entered the synagogue with their faces covered, and we actually have some video and audio of the scene outside the synagogue as this was going on. Initial reports indicated that the two perpetrators were affiliated with the Marxist-Leninist terror group People's Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Hamas, of course, the militant Palestinian group that is running the Gaza Strip right now, one of the most extreme Muslim sects in the world, praised the attack. And very, very interestingly, Lewis, Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president who is in the West Bank, actually condemned this attack. And as expected, we had no reason to think that Mahmoud Abbas, based on what his activity has been over the last couple of years, would praise the attack. This really shows, I get the feeling from the emails I get from people on the left and right and middle here in the U.S. that many don't distinguish between Palestinians, as this kind of amorphous term, that are the Hamas Gaza Strip Palestinians, and Palestinians using that amorphous term for the West Bank Mahmoud Abbas style individuals. And it's abundantly clear, and the more we learn, the more this is absolutely evident, that these are two groups that could not be more different in many ways.
In Palestine, you've got people who run the entire spectrum of, religious fanatics to completely normal people who just want to live their lives and have no desire to inflict, genocide on Jews. But this, of course, is very unfortunate for all of those reasonable, level-headed people, because this just makes the situation worse. And these terrorists probably have no idea that they're even doing that.
And the groups, the Islamist Hamas in Gaza started coming out with all sorts of statements, including saying that this was a response, this brutal killing involving meat cleavers and axes was a response to the murder of the martyr Yusuf Ramouni, referring to a bus driver from East Jerusalem who was found hanged inside his vehicle just a couple of days ago. Now, the problem with that is that while Palestinian media claimed that he was murdered, an actual autopsy was done and it established that he committed suicide. So at every turn, Lewis, we have Hamas hurting the possibilities for any advancement in peace, in part because by spreading this propaganda, they are affecting even reasonable Palestinians' view on the situation. Now, for all of this that's going on with Hamas, let's remember that we still have a situation where Benjamin Netanyahu, an individual who has absolutely no credibility as Prime Minister of Israel to negotiate real peace, is still in power. We have, I don't believe, and I've said this many, many times, I don't think we're going to have any real progress when it comes to peace in Israel with Benjamin Netanyahu at the helm.
Probably not. And to be honest, it might not matter who is at the helm. We may never have real progress. But if there's a chance at it, it's not going to be with Netanyahu. We
can assume that the IDF will probably seek revenge. It means that inevitably, even if they are able to actually find more individuals that were behind this attack, it means that more innocent civilians are likely to die. This will further exacerbate this vicious circle that we have in the region. And we have to go back and we have to find some way to restart actual peace talks. And with the vicious cycle that's going on, Lewis, it doesn't feel very likely to me that that's going to happen in earnest anytime soon.
We've had plenty of peace talks. We've had plenty of ceasefires. We've had plenty of lulls in the madness here. But it always sparks back up at some point for one reason or another. Something drastic needs to happen.
A few days ago at the Washington National Cathedral, there was an event where several hundred Muslim worshipers were there, along with other invited guests, and they were there for what is a first ever historic recitation of weekly Muslim prayers at what has been traditionally been a Christian sanctuary of prayer. And they were also there to hear leaders from various faiths call for unity, call for collegiality between the faiths. The event was closed to the public. There was heavy security, police checking every name and every bag. Organizers from several Muslim institutions said that there were some concerns about security and threats. However, it didn't stop. The heavy security didn't stop a very well-dressed, middle-aged woman who has been the center of a viral video over the last couple of weeks from getting in there and protesting. Now, This is a woman who had a viral video that went completely crazy, where she did a presentation about how Monster energy drinks are actually satanic, and she presented what she believed to be evidence of that. We didn't play that video because the company who is holding the copyright to that video has been very aggressive about preventing shows like ours from using that video. They actually told us we could use the video for $1,000, which I politely declined, Lewis. In any case, the same woman who was in that Monster energy drink viral video, she was actually at this Muslim prayer event, and she interrupted and started heckling, yelling, "America was founded on Christian principles. Leave our church alone." Let's take a look at the video and listen to the audio of this protest, I guess you would call it.
Jesus Christ died on that cross over there. He is the reason why we are to worship only Him. Jesus Christ is our Lord and Savior. We have built and allowed you your mosques in this country.
Let me explain the call for the prayer. The call for the prayer, it is being done in Arabic, and I would like to thank the Dean and Reverend Jean.
This is not the first time, as I mentioned, that Ms. Weick has been in the news. As Christian Nightmares points out, she made headlines when she had a slushie thrown at her while she was protesting gay people on Mother's Day. No surprise at all, Lewis. The loony right is applauding Ms. Weick as a hero on WorldNet Daily. It's hard to even get that out with a straight face. Yes, on WorldNet Daily, here are some comments about Ms. Weick's actions. They shielded their eyes from the Christian cross, but could not shield their ears from the truthful words of this one brave woman. They make her out to be some kind of incredible hero, as opposed to just an anti-gay, anti-Muslim religious nut who somehow got through security.
Yeah, in reality, just a really disrespectful and seemingly completely crazy religious fanatic. I think we covered the slushy video. I'm almost positive we covered that. And I hope that people have more slushies ready to go for this woman.
No, of course, you're not advocating violence against her.
No. I mean, slushies really don't do much harm. It's just going to be a little cold.
And a couple other comments from WorldNet Daily. We should all pray to have the courage that this woman displayed. The world needs it. Our nation desperately needs it. Jesus Christ is Lord. The woman herself said, Ms. Weick said in a WorldNet Daily interview, quote, "There are Muslims everywhere. Just go up, talk to them, and say, Jesus Christ is Lord. Be brave." Okay, well, Christine Weick reaching new levels of nuttiness, Lewis, incredibly disrespectful. And I always think that when we have conversations where the religious are trying to impose religion on the non-religious, that's crazy enough. But when you have different religious adherents of different religions arguing with each other about which is the right religion, for some reason that seems even crazier to me.
It does, and even more futile. But this is her mission in life, it seems. And like I said, I wouldn't mind seeing a few more slushies end up on her head.
We've talked about the absurdity of drug testing welfare recipients, and we saw in Florida that Republican Governor Rick Scott was a proponent of this. One of the amazing facts about the Florida program before it was struck down was that in spite of the frequent appeals from people like Rick Scott about how much money would be saved if we cut off drug-using welfare recipients from their benefits, the program saved the state $40,000 in denied benefits, but forced $246,000 in reimbursements for people who passed the tests. It was the furthest thing in the world from being fiscally conservative. We saw it happen in Utah, where such a small percentage of those on welfare were using drugs that the drug testing itself cost more than the amount that would have been saved by denying welfare benefits to those found using drugs. And now we see Scott Walker, and this is disgusting. Scott Walker, the Republican governor of Wisconsin, who was just reelected in spite of the fact that he promised to create jobs, he destroyed jobs, he destroyed the power of labor to negotiate collectively. Just insane what Scott Walker has done. He now wants to drug test not welfare recipients, but food stamp recipients. And it appears that this is both illegal and unconstitutional. It's illegal in the sense that the Department of Agriculture actually bans states from adding more requirements in order to receive food stamp benefits than those that are established federally. So federally, the Department of Agriculture doesn't require drug testing, and a state's adding that would violate that rule. Some states have gotten around this by saying, well, we will drug test the food stamp recipients who we have reasonable suspicion to believe are doing drugs, which creates a probable cause type of situation. But for the most part, states are not doing this. And the constitutionality is also in question, as civil libertarians and advocates for the poor are arguing this may well violate the Fourth Amendment. States can try to get around this with the reasonable suspicion clause that I mentioned, but many civil libertarians and attorneys and advocates say this is actually unconstitutional. And what's amazing to me, Lewis, I just can't wrap my head around this. The average food stamp benefit in the United States, as of about 10 days ago, the data is updated 10 days ago, is $133.07. We're talking about drug testing a population that on average is getting $133 a month in benefits in a way that would be, number one, against the law of the Department of Agriculture, number two, possibly unconstitutional, and number three, really not fiscally conservative when you consider $133 is the average benefit.
It's incredible that he was reelected. He destroyed jobs. And then for those people who lost their jobs, he's trying to make it harder for them to get benefits that they need.
Right. He's responsible for them even being on the food stamps, and now he wants to drug test them.
Yeah, it's amazing. You know what? He'll probably get elected again, too.
Scott Walker is one disgusting politician, and it is sickening to me that the people of Wisconsin have chosen to re-elect this guy after putting him back in during a recall election. Just insane. Back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to The David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show membership program is made possible in part by liberalbias.com. Liberalbias.com is now presenting a weekly Liberal Bias video series on the Liberal Bias YouTube channel. Check that out and learn all of the ways that reality has a liberal bias. Today's new member of the day is Aldous Sills. Aldous Sills, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. You can join Aldous as a member, vote with your dollars, support our program by going to davidpakman.com/membership, or, and I have my calendar here, go to davidpakman.com/calendar15 and get yourself one of these bad boys, a 2015 Hatriot Mail calendar. Lewis, have you received yours yet?
I have not received my calendar yet.
All right, it seems like we are experiencing some shipping delays, but you should have it any day, and then Lewis can show us his calendar, including maybe, if you want, the graphic he created that is in the calendar. Get a calendar for free with your membership at davidpakman.com/calendar15. There's an interesting article that points out that some Hillary Clinton advocates who are really into the idea of Hillary Clinton running for president in 2016, of course, as a Democrat for the Democratic Party nomination and subsequently for president, they believe, some of them believe, that she could have a chance of actually doing even better than President Obama did, looking at the electoral map. And this includes Mitch Stewart, President Obama's 2012 Battleground State Director, who's now an independent consultant advising the grassroots group Ready for Hillary. He put out some electoral math that he believes could show Hillary Clinton could start with President Obama's map. He is under the assumption, Mitch Stewart believes, if Hillary Clinton ran and was the Democratic nominee, she would definitely get all of the states that President Obama won, and actually believes that because of Hillary Clinton's Southern roots to some extent, of course, in Arkansas, and the fact that she has appealed to more white voters historically than some other Democrats have, that she could really have a chance in some other states as well. Looking at Pennsylvania and Ohio's numbers in 2008 in her primary wins, combined with the fact that former Indiana governor and Senator Evan Bayh had strong support for her. Mitch Stewart says that there are some other states that Hillary Clinton could pick up as well. This includes states like Arizona and Georgia, potentially. These are states that Democrats already think might be democratically trending towards them. It's very, very clearly too early for me to be talking about specific electoral maps for 2016, given that we haven't even started any type of campaigning in earnest or any kind of primary. But the concept is interesting to me that because of demographic shifts, we have Democratic consultants now more seriously talking about a broader expansion that would include some traditionally red states. I'm not convinced that 2016 is the year where that would happen. I'm not convinced Hillary Clinton would be the Democratic nominee who would most benefit from that. But the fact that this is becoming a very real and frequent conversation, Lewis, is telling us a lot about these changing demographics.
It's interesting. And I think you're right. I think 16 will be a little too early. I mean, look what we just witnessed here in the midterms. But as we've talked about, Clinton is posed to do quite well.
Yeah, and think about the fact also that we're not even beyond the war on Christmas. I mean, it's really way too early to start speculating about electoral maps when we still have to fight that war before we can even really move on.
Did you get your RPGs yet? You might need them.
I've not. It's tough to get weapons here in New York City, so I have not gotten anything to defend myself in the war on Christmas yet. But I plan to hopefully be out of town for much of that war.
Because when the elves break into your home, David, they're fierce. They're ferocious.
You might remember that Mitt Romney lost the 2012 presidential election to Barack Obama. It was quite an embarrassing loss in the sense that Mitt Romney seemed completely convinced that he was going to win. Much of that convincing was done by internal Republican pollsters who seemed to keep telling Mitt Romney that he had this thing in the bag, in spite of what reliable, trustworthy pollsters were telling everybody else. And now Mitt Romney was on Face the Nation with Bob Schieffer, and he was asked to comment about what should Obama do and talk about ISIS. And I'll be honest, Lewis, it made me a little bit sad because Mitt Romney shows up there. He had that kind of pained look on his face that he had through much of the debates and campaigns, so it's not a new look. But it really just seems like, you know, they're kind of throwing him a bone. What is Mitt Romney, this has-been whose only positive legislative accomplishment, Romney Care, was ridiculed by most of his party as being too liberal and socialistic, which he did as governor of Massachusetts. It all just made me kind of sad for Mitt Romney in a way. Here's some of the video and the audio.
What is your advice to the Republicans at this point, Governor?
Well, my advice to the Democrats at this point, and to the president in particular, is take a breath. The president said that he was not on the ballot in the election that was just held, but that his policies were. And the American people sent a very clear message to the president about his policies. They're not happy about them. The president ought to let the Republican Congress, the Republican House and the Republican Senate come together with legislation that they put on his desk which relates to immigration. And he can veto it or not, but let the Congress and let this election have its say, as opposed to jumping in and by doing something unilaterally and in a way which is extra constitutional, he's poking an eye of the Republican leaders in Congress, and he's making it more difficult for there to be a permanent solution to this issue.
What's your reaction, Lewis? I mean, I saw, and obviously it's like, who cares what Mitt Romney thinks at this point? I'm not even arguing that we should or shouldn't care. I mean, obviously no one cares what Mitt Romney thinks at this point. And it just kind of shows up there as this has-been, Obama, this and that. It made me sad.
And why is he even bothering? After the Republican sweep in the midterms, Obama can't get reelected. It just sounds like he just wants to vent, that he's bitter, and it seems unnecessary. Yeah,
and I also question why any booking producer would say, let's ask Mitt Romney what he thinks, because it seems like the guy really is just, why is he trustworthy? In other words, why would we listen to him? What evidence do we have that his ideas for what Republicans or Democrats should do are what anybody should be listening to?
Maybe we just don't understand it because we are not Republicans and we do not have that right-wing point of view. Perhaps they want to hear from Mitt Romney.
Maybe so. No, maybe Republicans like hearing from him. If you're a Republican who thinks Mitt Romney is relevant and you like hearing from him, email me. Let me know why. We often talk about this discussion that exists mostly among the anti-gay right about whether people are born gay. And you might say, David, what does it matter whether people are born gay? We shouldn't be discriminating against gay people no matter what. I happen to agree with you, but the assertion that being gay is a choice is used a lot to justify discrimination against LGBT individuals, so it is important for that reason. Of course, we know from talking to many gay people on the program and off the program, no one has ever told me that they chose to be gay. They just are gay in the same way that many of us just are straight. We never decided to be straight. But not everybody accepts this. So there are studies being done around this to figure out, can we find any genetic basis for homosexuality? And there's a new study that has made significant progress along these lines. There was a genetic analysis of 409 pairs of gay brothers. It included some twins, it included some who were not twins, and it provides the strongest evidence yet that people are born gay. The study clearly links, more clearly than any prior study, the study links sexual orientation in men with two regions of the human genome that have been implicated before. One is on the X chromosome and one is on chromosome 8. This is important, broadly speaking, to the science because it seems that there is a biological determination to homosexuality. There are some countries, like Uganda, where being gay is still criminalized. We still see some legitimacy, even in our own country, for the idea that somebody could, if they do the right prayers, no longer be gay. If they go to the right so-called therapist, they could cure their gayness. And if we could get some more established connection between a biological basis for homosexuality and these right-wing bigots, we might at least be able to push them off of that reasoning for justifying discrimination. Now, I have no doubt whatsoever, Lewis, that if we were to, beyond any reasonable doubt, confirm that there may be many factors to homosexuality, but that there is a biological basis for it, I'm not imagining a world where the right-wing bigots go away. Obviously, they'll just come up with something else.
Since when do religious fanatics and religious bigots care about science? Maybe this will convince some of them to change their tune, but I assume that there will still be plenty of discrimination. And, it makes me think that there might be a new slur for homosexuals now that we have this information. Yeah,
something related to the chromosome or something like that. No, of course they will find some new way to slander LGBT individuals. The study does make clear, though, that whatever the biological basis, you can find a biological basis or connection amongst LGBT individuals, gay, lesbian individuals. But that doesn't mean that it is the biological basis alone. In other words, we could still be very much open to the idea that there's a biological basis which then is influenced by development in the womb, early environment, right? Nobody is saying that once you find the gay gene, those individuals will definitely be gay. This is an evolving science, and this is one of the most important studies thus far.
And this brings up another topic, and that is once we are able to control genes and alter genes, would you be able to make your kid gay, or would you be able to make sure that your kid isn't gay?
This is very interesting what you bring up. There's a book, and I forget what book it is. It may actually be The Forever War by Joe Haldeman, who we interviewed on this program, where for reasons of population control, everybody is genetically modified to be gay. They are regularly freezing female eggs and male sperm. And they essentially have a one out, one in situation where when one person dies, they use the frozen sperm and egg to fertilize and grow a new embryo. And it's fascinating what you're saying because it's an idea that for decades has actually been explored in much science fiction and fiction writing. Okay, let's take a break. Next, we have a faith-healing verdict in just a horrible, egregious, heinous case of parental neglect.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to The David Pakman Show.
We have a faith-healing verdict. Travis and Wenona Rossiter were the parents of their now deceased 12-year-old daughter, Sybil. Sybil died in February 2013 when her parents decided to treat her diabetes with prayer instead of actual medical treatment. Now, KEZI is reporting that after 4 hours of deliberating, the jury found Wenona and Travis Rossiter guilty of manslaughter in the first and second degree. The trial began the earlier Tuesday, concluded with the guilty verdict yesterday recently Monday evening. The Rossiters will be sentenced next month. They're members of what is called the Church of the Firstborn. They believe that any medical treatment is sinful. There are 3 different sects for this Church of the Firstborn. All are offshoots of the Mormon Church of Latter-day Saints. You'll notice that while medical interventions are apparently sins, Lewis, the mom, as we see in this picture, had no problem getting eyeglasses to correct her vision. It sure sounds like a medical intervention to me.
Well, I think it could be argued there that that is just, a device used externally. There was no procedure done.
Well, but hold on a second, Lewis. You go to a medical professional to evaluate why it is that you can't see that well. Is it cataracts or is it just myopia, or why do you need the glasses? There is certainly an intervention being done there by the medical community.
I suppose you are right. You're not going to try and talk sense into someone like this, right?
No,
because
certainly not.
Clearly, there is no sense here. These are complete religious lunatics.
A lot of people writing into me and saying, hey, David, this should not be manslaughter. This is clearly criminally negligent homicide.
Yes.
And the argument could be made, how can you, as an adult in the modern United States, be so ignorant to the empirical realities of medicine that you could even believe prayer in the absence of actual medical treatment might save the girl? And under that basis, couldn't you say, this wasn't just a sincerely held religious belief. This was something completely predictable that any reasonable adult should have expected. If you have diabetes and you have only prayer as treatment, that's not going to cut it, and thus it should be homicide. Do you agree, Lewis?
It should be homicide, yes. And when you are praying and your child is not getting any better, I think you have to include that as well.
Idaho is having a significant problem with faith-healing parents. There have been 12 deaths of children from so-called faith-healing Christian families in the state of Idaho. Lawmakers and public officials don't seem particularly interested in challenging a state law that provides a religious exemption from manslaughter and murder charges. The children's families in Idaho mostly belong to a Pentecostal group known as the Followers of Christ, which punishes family members who seek any kind of medical treatment by banning them from their church. According to state law, parents can substitute prayer as a form of treatment. There is a religious exemption here, which covers manslaughter, capital murder, and negligent homicide charges, but it cannot be cited if a parent uses any other form of treatment on top of praying for the child. Here's a quote from an advocacy group co-founder named Rita Swan. If the parent combines prayer with orange juice or a cool bath to bring down a fever, the parent loses the exemption. According to Swan's organization, Idaho is one of 32 states that have religious exemptions to felony or misdemeanor charges involving children. There is a bill that called for a change to this. It did not advance. Democratic and Republican legislators were asked about this. None of them, Lewis, seem very interested in doing anything about it.
No, and it's not getting much media attention either, is it? We're talking about it, of course, but you're not going to see this on corporate media.
No, and you could say, well, David, 12 children in 3 years. Think about how many children are dying in Idaho from not having the flu shot, how many children are dying from car accidents. This is not a huge deal. And I would agree that in terms of the number of deaths, it's not the biggest deal, but we have a real problem in this country now with this creeping allowance of religious exemption for so-called religious beliefs to just fundamental rule of law that is incredibly dangerous. So while, yes, it is only 12 children, I would argue fervently, Lewis, to quote you, that this needs to be looked at, because with every step that we have in the direction of religion allows you to circumvent pieces of the law that conflict with your beliefs, you open up the door to even more legal challenges along those same lines, as the Hobby Lobby ruling has shown us.
Indeed, and it's so messy with individual states having their own legislation based on this or lack thereof. And I would assume that the majority of these 12 children, the majority of those cases were probably preventable. Whereas if you have children dying from the flu or other ailments, those are not necessarily preventable.
Well, although 90% of the kids who died from the flu last year had not been vaccinated, and presumably something like 75% of that 90% would have been preventable. So in many cases, we are talking, in both cases, about preventable illness and death.
That is true. And I'm sure some of those children are falling into the same category here, with parents who refuse to give them treatment.
No doubt about it. Follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/dpacman, and like us on Facebook, facebook.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We recently told you about the verdict in the Michael Dunn loud music shooting in Florida. Michael Dunn, who shot directly at a vehicle parked outside of a convenience store, killing one individual, got life plus 105 years in spite of trying to claim that he feared for his life, in part because of that loud music. We got not even close to such reasonable results in Georgia. You might remember about this case from back when it happened. Philip Sailors shot a Hispanic man who turned around in his driveway. His GPS had brought him to the wrong driveway or the wrong street. He pulled into this man's driveway in order to turn around, and Philip Sailors went out and shot the man dead. This was in January of 2013 in Georgia. We now have a verdict. He pled to the misdemeanor charge for the shooting. Channel 2 Action News broke this story a few days ago about a plea deal that reduced the murder charge for Philip Sailors to a misdemeanor charge of involuntary manslaughter. It has spared Philip Sailors any jail time. No jail time whatsoever. Probation plus a $500 fine is the penalty. Rodrigo Diaz, who's the victim's father, said that he wasn't expecting anything today. Investigators agree that GPS misguided Rodrigo Diaz to the wrong house. Diaz was trying to get to the house across the street so he could pick up a friend to go roller skating, inadvertently pulled into the driveway of Philip Sailors, who came out and shot him dead. As I mentioned, 12 months probation, a $500 fine. District Attorney Danny Porter says that the family was on board with the plea deal, saying the family is not in a position where they want Mr. Sailors sent to prison for the rest of his life. They're in a position where it is most important to them that the public understand that Mr. Diaz, who was driving the car, was not committing any crime. His eldest son agreed, the older brother of the victim, the son of the father. There is no point for him to be in lifetime in prison. What we get from that, nothing. It's shocking to me, Lewis, that everything about this is shocking to me. I understand the idea of why would you punish someone when the punishment is not going to bring back your family member. But at the same time, this is such an insane crime. Someone turns around in your driveway, you go outside and shoot them, and now they get probation and a $500 fine.
Yes, I think the idea here is to lock this guy away to make sure that he doesn't do this again. And it sounds like he very well could.
Is he losing his gun privileges? It doesn't appear that way. I mean, it all is just insane to me.
Yeah, and I can't put myself, I can't even wrap my head around this family being okay with this. They sound like saints to me. They sound like the nicest people on the planet.
And
but,
I don't fault them. If this is what they want, that's fine. But it's also surprising that the prosecutors would agree to probation and a $500 fine for killing a random dude who turned around in your driveway.
Right. That's even more puzzling. If it were me, yes, of course, I would have put this guy away, probably for the rest of his life. He's not a young man. because I don't want him shooting people for no reason.
A Saudi man has divorced his wife at their wedding after seeing her face for the first time. I know that news of a divorce is not really rare these days in the U.S. Most weddings, most marriages end in divorce. This one is a little bit odd. It's in Saudi Arabia. A groom asked his wife for a divorce while she was still wearing her wedding dress, nearly right after exchanging vows. The bride and groom were from a town called Medina. They had never met in person, which is not uncommon for people marrying in some parts of the Middle East. In Saudi customs, a man and woman are permitted to look at each other only once before the wedding. This couple opted not to even take that first glance. The wedding took place without issue. The trouble began when the couple had to pose for a photographer. That's when the bride removed her veil and smiled. And the groom did not like what he saw, Lewis, and said, "You are not the girl I want to marry. You are not the one I had imagined. I am sorry, but I divorce you." The bride had a total breakdown and had to be taken to a hospital. What an insane story, Lewis.
It's an insane story. It's an insane situation with these arranged marriages and the whole thing. I would say you're not only doing yourself a major disservice to yourself and your partner if you are not intimate with them before getting married. But not even looking at them is certainly a recipe for disaster.
Lewis won't even go on a date without looking at pictures of the person. And this guy married someone without even knowing what she looked like. Isn't that amazing, Lewis?
Incredible. Even more amazing is you making things up about me. But yeah, anyway, this is clearly this is no way to conduct your life. I mean, is this why there are so many unhappy people and bad marriages, and why women are treated so poorly? Is because you don't see the other person, you don't talk to the other person. All of a sudden you get married to the other person and these people end up hating each other.
I would actually argue that this is probably the simplest way that this marriage could end for the woman. Because if this is how it all started and this is how this went, I can only imagine that it would have been much worse 10 years from now. She probably should be glad that this is the way it went.
Imagine how many situations just like this, the two people don't like each other, don't like the way the other one looks, and say, you know what, our parents are going to be upset. Let's just keep everything cool, and let's just get married and deal with it. And then boom, the two are miserable for the rest of their lives.
Relationship advice from producer Lewis. This should be a segment. I like it. Voicemail number is 219-2DavidP. I get some emails from people saying, "Hey, David, how many voicemails do you receive? Do you receive lots of voicemails that you don't use?" I'm going to give you a little taste of what it's like every single morning. First, this morning, I went to check voicemail, and I had this voicemail from an individual who calls and mostly gives me religious opinion. Take a listen.
David, I came up with an analogy, right? You know how you have water, right? And the rivers flow, and it flows through the land, right? And then people drink it, and it flows through the people, and it goes to the ocean.
Yeah, I can't even get through this stuff. This guy used the full 3 minutes that we have before the voicemail number cuts you off, and immediately called back and left another such soliloquy.
David, check it out. You know how in the Gospels it says you can't serve two masters because you'll,
Yeah. 3 more minutes like this. Then a guy calls to try to leave a voicemail. He has no cell phone reception whatsoever. That was next.
David, I want to... watching a lot of news.
Right. Then the biblical guy calls back again.
David, check it out. If the rod that they rule with, right, it's a rod of iron that can't be bent, right? So it would be like a knowledge and a wisdom. Right?
3 more minutes of that, and then cell phone guy calls again, and the cell phone is still not working right.
I apologize for the previous message that I left. I hadn't caught up with all of the videos that you had posted on the Gamergate issue. I do agree with you that, this German issue clearly does not represent.
So ladies and gentlemen, that is every day. Every day we get about 50 voicemails, and a lot of them are 3 minutes long. They're just about scripture. We can't hear people. So it really takes a lot of time to sort out and pull the good voicemails that we can use. 219-2DavidP is the number. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, so to speak. Today on the bonus show, Neil Young calls for fans to boycott Starbucks. File goes into hibernation, and the DEA checks in on the NFL. What will Lewis say about that on today's bonus show? DavidPakman.com/membership to sign up, get the bonus show, and get yourself your free calendar with your David Pakman Show membership at DavidPakman.com/calendar15.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com.